It's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks a lot for making the time, obviously, at the end of year busy schedules everyone has. This is a really exciting opportunity, and we're glad that you also share that excitement with us. We are waiting just for a couple of colleagues to join, but we'll proceed without them, just to honor everybody's time, make sure we have enough time for everyone's questions at the end of the webinar as well. So if you allow me, I'll just share my screen and we'll just do a quick run through of where we are with the innovation facility. So yeah, so this is the first session, number one, just to give prospective project proponents more information about the facility itself and about the application process. You will have seen that it was only recently launched last Wednesday, the 11th of December. So we're having this first session now just for those early movers that are engaged and interested in getting started with some of the background documentation and ideation of this, the concept that we've put together now. So my name is James McBreen. I'm Program Manager for Technology and Innovation at the IUCN Centre for Conservation Action. And under my portfolio is the innovation facility that was recently launched between BMZ, KfW and IUCN just early this year. Everything you see that we're going to be covering today is can be found in the guidelines for applicants. I just flagged at the beginning of today's call to make sure that you all are able to access the website where you'll find the guidelines for applicants and the concept note template and the annexes that go with it. And we'll just do a run through of each of those now, just to keep everyone on the same page. And apologies for anyone who has already reviewed extensively these documents. But as this is our first information session, it's important just to set the baseline to know where we are. So what is the innovation facility? First and foremost, it responds to this challenge at the global level that, climate biodiversity targets are massively underfunded. We're with 5 years to go before 2030 targets, at least on the biodiversity front. We really need to scale and accelerate action towards achieving these goals and targets at the climate and biodiversity level. Private sector investment continues to remain insufficient, especially related to nature-based solutions. This may in large part be to a lack of investable, bankable projects, potentially. And we think that the voluntary carbon markets are a critical yet underutilized tool to work towards addressing this insufficiency. Still limited innovation and early stage risk takers. I think innovation, it means many different things for many different people. But I think in this case, we're going to be looking a little bit later on around how we're framing it in the innovation facility. Clues in the name, no? And obviously where we've seen so far is, often the biodiversity and community benefits are treated as secondary goals, with the focus has predominantly been on carbon, but in reality, we can't get carbon unless we are operating in more resilient, biodiverse spaces, and making sure there's a full and effective participation of local stakeholders for the continued success and the continued scalability and long-term sustainability of the actions. So the mission of the innovation facility is to essentially to address these funding gaps by supporting predominantly innovative nature-based carbon projects. It's going to do this in the following by addressing the following four objectives. So by delivering nature positive impacts, making measurable contributions to biodiversity. Now, of course, the funding window is 2 years, but this funding window for the grant facility of the innovation facility fits within the lifetime of the nature-based carbon project itself, which should not be less than 40 years and potentially up to 100 years. By leveraging the voluntary carbon market, really trying to drive home the utility and the usefulness of having the VCM and making sure that that is needs driven, demand responsive to the local dynamics and context within each of the sites and the locations in which they're operating to ensure we hit the targets of having that social inclusion, benefit sharing, and gender equality, and fostering innovation for impact. So how do we hope that these projects are innovative? That is something that we haven't been overly prescriptive on at all, but it's a question of how we can essentially take a number of successful approaches, different technologies, different solutions, and how they can feed into this overarching framing of ensuring high integrity, high impact carbon credits that deliver on both carbon, biodiversity, and livelihood outcomes. So the total fund of the innovation facility, it's a 9 million funding from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, via KfW Development Bank. The funding amount for the grant of the innovation facility will be between 750,000 euros and 1.5 million euros per project. That's over an up to 24-month period, and there's a hard stop at the end of June 2027. So please take note of that as well when you think about the possibility of applying for this. And the grant innovation facility is managed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, of which myself and other team working on this are all part. So what are the expected outcomes? And the chapter, you'll see the chapter numbers here all refer to the chapter where you'll find this information in the guidelines for applicants. So the expected outcomes, so as we've said before, mobilization of private finance, leveraging increased engagement from the private sector to ensure the sustainability of the projects that are being started under the innovation facility, and then giving that sustainability over the long term. Ensuring, the outcome of project validation and registration. This needs to happen before the end of the 2-year grant period. And that also will hopefully inform many of you in terms of if you're thinking about the maturity of the projects and some of the data and information you currently have on existing project sites. Maybe some of you have already started this process. So hopefully this gives you an indication of where we hope to achieve this outcome before the 2-year period, getting the validation and registration finalized. It's ambitious, but we think it's definitely doable with the great experience and expertise that many of you have. Improve livelihood benefits, that can be measured in a number of ways, always making sure that we have that kind of job creation, equity of solutions and activities, and ensuring that kind of effective participation and benefit sharing of any proposed activities in the landscapes that are being restored, land and seascapes. And of course, positive environmental social outcomes. How are we measuring these environmental outcomes? We will be using the STAR metric, species threat abatement and restoration metric, and the social outcomes with a very robust safeguard, ESMS screening and safeguard tools that each of the projects will be required to develop before, during each of the projects. So in terms of eligibility for funding, this has been something that we've obviously received the early communications on in these opening days since the call was launched on the 11th of December. It's important to understand the eligibility categories. There are 3 categories that we're focusing on: forests, inland wetlands, and coastal wetlands. Red projects are excluded, jurisdictional red projects are excluded. The eligible categories are, I'll just go into a bit more detail in each of those as well now. The aspiration is to have 2 projects funded for each of the categories. So we're looking at ideally funding 6 projects between that 750,000 to 1.5 million mark. But obviously that is not fixed, it's not set in stone, but that is the kind of the framework in which we're operating to have that 2 projects under the innovation facility from each of these categories. Within the forest restoration, the natural regeneration, assisted natural regeneration, and planting native species, agroforestry, silver arable, silver pastoral, and agro-silvicultural systems. Obviously, there may be a mixture of all of these, and that's okay as long as it falls within the eligible category itself. In terms of inland wetlands, looking at the activities of rewetting, revegetation, and restoring hydrology, principally. Again, this is just to make clear that what we're focusing on is removals of additional removals, yes. And in terms of blue carbon ecosystems, so mangrove restoration, seagrass bed restoration, kelp forest restoration, and salt marsh restoration, the essence here is to really hopefully get two really strong projects that can demonstrate how we can deliver, the climate, biodiversity, and livelihood benefits through these innovative approaches that are being proposed and developed under the innovation facility, and then really use that as a model to scale and accelerate action beyond these project sites. So there's an aspiration to get very much additional funding once this 2-year window is up, and not necessarily to continue funding in these early startups, but having an opportunity to utilize, some of the proposals that we're receiving in this first call for proposals, and then to review those and to have sort of oven-ready proposals that we can tap into and expedite funding to thereafter. So in terms of eligibility for funding, again, this has been something which has been bounced back and forth in terms of the eligible project proponents. It's clear in the guidelines, so it's local international NGOs, indigenous peoples and local community organizations, private project developers, forestry agricultural companies, innovative startups, cooperatives, and indeed any other entities with the respective expertise. Now, that's quite all-encompassing, and that's on purpose, because we need to make sure that there is each of the project leads are directly responsible for the preparation, implementation of the project itself. Obviously, just at an administrative level, there has to have an organization bank account, and there needs to be engagement of local staff and that contribution to improving local livelihoods as well through the project activities. The eligibility criteria. So again, project categories, choosing one of the forest or inland or coastal wetland categories. Each of the projects need to be in an ODA eligible and country that is not subject to any international sanctions. However, the applicant themselves can be based in an eligible country. It's important to highlight that because many of you may be based outside of the countries in which you're operating, and that's absolutely fine so long as the project activities itself will be implemented in an ODA eligible country with no international sanctions. In or near key biodiversity areas, you'll find additional guidance in the guidelines for applicants on this. We've purposefully left the proximity question because I think it is very context specific. We are looking for projects that are either in KBAs because of their ecological integrity, or near KBAs that could, through the project activities, generate some significant benefits for biodiversity, for certain species, for the ecosystem integrity more broadly, and for connectivity, right? So if we're looking at projects that are, X kilometers from a KBA with activities that could be conducive to improving the connectivity or conducive to improving the status of certain species within that landscape, then that's something that is that we're looking for, right? We want to create that landscape level impact and that sustainability of the actions that are being implemented at the project level, and going beyond just the boundaries of the project site itself and thinking about the implications for biodiversity around and not just inside the project site itself. Regulatory additionality, so activities that are not required by law are eligible. And then, of course, the land use history, so no change in the last 10 years. That is no deforestation, degradation over the last 10 years, and you'll be required to submit evidence of that in the concept note submission as well. So, of course, there is an exclusion list in terms of the eligibility for funding. First of all, involuntary resettlements or forced eviction, economic displacement, no human rights violations of rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, no exploitation of indigenous peoples in isolation or initial contact, no damage to cultural heritage or resources through the project or proposed project, no reinforcement of harmful norms or gender inequalities, and no forced or exploitative child labor activities. And there's an additional page of the exclusion list. This is important, of course. So no projects harming biodiversity near protected areas. And indeed, that extends to no harming biodiversity, right? No goods or technology for military or dual use purposes. No non-compliance of hazardous waste projects, including nuclear waste, and no illegal or banned pesticides or herbicide use in any of the project activities that would receive funding from the grant innovation facility. No activities focused on research only, and no standalone international events or trainings themselves. And you'll find in the guidelines for applicants, the annex, there's a grant budget template, which we will just have a quick look at here afterwards. So just to highlight, the grant budget that you would be applying for is the funding that you'd be requesting for the grant period, right? So that's from the date of signature of the contract with IUCN up to the 30th of June 2027. Just to be clear that we're talking about grant budget, and then afterwards we talk about the project financing, which is the lifetime of the project. So eligible cost criteria. So necessary, the costs need to be necessary for project implementation. They need to be directly related to services and supplies. They need to be reasonable, justified, and financially sound. They need to be cost effective, recorded, and be value for money. And they need to be incurred only during the grant funding period. No funding costs before the contract is signed, and there can be no expenditures after the 30th of June 2027 either. The costs need to be identifiable, verifiable, and tax compliant. In terms of the eligible cost categories, we've left this so that the minimum requirement is that there is a 60% of the total grant budget that you're requesting should be attributed to restoration activities. There are some examples, and there's some example formulas inside the budget template that you'll find as reference when you download that in an Excel format. But the minimum 60%, that is a requirement, and that's something that will be held to each of the proposals too. Then the broad categories include preparation of the nature-based carbon project, monitoring, livelihoods, community development, staff costs, others that can include legal fees, for example, and then indirect costs as well. And it's important to highlight that, of course, between that, for the remaining 40% of the budget that doesn't include necessarily the restoration activities, then that's something that we would require you to basically develop that using our budget template, and then to make sure that they are aligned with the eligible cost criteria as well, right? So we would like to see this cross-reference between the cost criteria to what you're including in the cost categories. There's a requirement for co-financing, so an additional funding of a minimum 25% of the grant amount required. So if you're requesting 750,000 euros to the grant, then there'd be a requirement of 187,000 euro match funding from your part. Equally, if you're requesting a 1.5 million grant from innovation facility, then you'd be required to provide a 375,000 euro match funding contribution. The sources can be private, government, etc. And the proof of this match funding should be submitted by the end of the grant funding period. That is to say, by the end of June 2027. So here's just a quick look at a screenshot of the top part of the budget. And effectively, this can be found in Annex 6 of the guidelines for applicants. It's a downloadable Excel file, so please, if you haven't done so already, please do download it, and you'll see that the example formulas are in there. It's fairly straightforward. The costings here are just only examples, and there's a clear explanation around that further up in the tab when you get into the grant budget. So yeah, I won't need to go into that detail here and now. If you have any questions on the budget specifically, or on the eligibility or the categories, then we're happy to answer those afterwards as well, of course. So in terms of ineligible costs, so debt service charges, interest are ineligible. Provisions for losses or potential future liabilities are ineligible. Custom duties are ineligible. Costs for purchase of land and water rights are ineligible. No cost for sanctioned entities or individuals, and taxes are also ineligible costs. So we've looked now just at the grant budget. That was for the period of the 2-year grant, up to 24-month grant period. Now we're looking at the project financing. This relates to the project lifetime. That is the nature-based carbon project and the lifetime of that project, which is, according to the global standards, minimum 40 years up to 100 years. So eligible cost criteria for the project financing of the nature-based carbon project. Again, the eligible costs criteria is the same, necessary for project implementation, directly related to services and supplies, reasonable, justified, financially sound, cost-effective, recorded and value for money, incurred only during grant funding period, identifiable, verifiable, and tax compliant. So they're exactly the same eligible cost criteria as for the budget. Keep things straightforward. And this is the screenshot of the Annex 7, which is a project financing template, which you can find annexed to the guidelines for applicants on the Innovation Facility website. Again, I don't need to go into details. The costing here is included as an example. Please do not take this as an entry that is based on any particular real life project. This is helping you to look at the formulas and to see how it's constructed to help you in the completion of this. And it goes up to the time period of the lifetime of the project as well. So we have now the final chapter, which is the application process itself. Again, we are here 6 days after we launched the call for concept notes. We're really grateful for all of you for being here now. It's middle of December. It's been a very intense year for everyone, I think. So we appreciate your time and dedication to join us here today. And this is the very first step, which would be relating to the preparation of the concept note. So we'll be looking at, for the purpose of the rest of today's session, the first two, the preparation of concept note and submission of concept note. Then, of course, there's the eligibility check once it's submitted, technical financial review and selection criteria, and then the selection result announced for the concept note and the full proposal development submission. So it's a 2-stage process. The shortlisted concept notes will be invited to develop a full proposal, and then those full proposals will go through a similar eligibility check, technical financial review, and then there will be final selection and the signature of grants. So for the purposes of today, the first two are our main focus, of course. And I'm happy to explain a little bit about the timeline beyond the submission of the concept note as well, just as a reference if we want to later on as well, yeah. So this is in chapters 3.1 and 3.2 in the guidelines for applicants and preparation and submission. And effectively, you'll find here Annex 2 is the concept note template. And this needs to be submitted online through the IUCN Grants portal. The IUCN Grants portal will be live at the end of December. So the recommendation is basically to use the Annex 2, which is the concept note template, as it will appear in the grants portal. And you can use it as a reference to develop some of the content, but that will need to be transferred to the grants portal. Unfortunately, it's not just a simple upload, the document. It is actually a manual migration of the content from the concept note to the grants portal itself. The reason for that is it's effectively for monitoring and to make sure that the fields where there are character and word limits, that they are adhered to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to capture their proposed project and activities using the same number of characters and words as well. So the breakdown of the concept note is this. Basically, there's 6 sections, A through F. The first section is just around the project lead, the proponent, and other project participants. Second section is on project description eligibility. So looking at the description of the project, eligibility criteria, how the proposed project will match up to that, and looking at the status of any existing project and documentation that you have, and looking at the timeline that you're working towards within what we're proposing for the innovation facility and how that aligns. And in the third section, breaking down into the four key focus areas of the facility, so focusing on the biodiversity value. So you're looking at the STAR metric, which we will help you obtain if you're unable to directly. Looking at the carbon, so there's a greenhouse gas accounting template, which is Annex 7 of the guidelines that you would need to complete. The social, developing some initial stakeholder engagement analysis documentation of the engagement that you have taken so far, both at the concept stage and in any previous activities that you're doing in the landscape to help consolidate the framing of the engagement of local communities and stakeholders at the project and landscape level. And then, of course, what's the innovativeness of your project? You'll have an opportunity to exemplify a little bit some of the exciting things that you are rolling out, or some of the things that you would like to, but there would need to be some significant basis for existing innovation already for it to be selected as part of the innovation facility grant beneficiary. In the fourth section, look again, the grant budget and the project financing, what we just looked at briefly in the previous slides. And that is effectively the two annexes. So the portal itself will be, please upload your grant budget in Excel and please upload your project financing in Excel. So you can already start working on some of those documents already, wherever possible and applicable. In the fifth section, environmental social safeguards, it's really important to make sure that we are in full adherence to the environmental social management system and the screening that will take place on the shortlisted concepts that we receive is a significant step in the review and the selection process for the concept notes that we do receive. And then, of course, the due diligence and the financial capacity questionnaire, you'll find that annexed at the back of the guidelines. And basically it's a self questionnaire where you'll complete that, focusing on due diligence, your financial capacity as an organization. Then that goes through to our senior grants manager in IUCN for review, and then any feedback in order to advance that as well. So the checklist that you'll need to, obviously this exists already in the guidelines, but just to give a highlight and overview of this, the checklist for Section A is the founding document of the organization of which you are of the proponent. Representation letter applies only if you are part of a consortium and you are representing different consortium members as project lead. In Section B, the project location map. So there's quite a simple lat-long function in the portal where you can just upload your latitude and longitude. But it would also be helpful to have, of course, your the maps. You definitely need to upload the land use change map over the last 10 years to demonstrate there's been no deforestation, degradation in the landscape. And of course, the state of the project, any studies and assessments that exist at the project site. As I just mentioned previously, the IBAT species threat abatement restoration metric report produced. IUCN can help you produce that if you do not already have access and are not able to generate that yourselves. Effectively, what it gives us is it gives us a score, or gives you a score, I should say, that would assess and communicate the threat to species and the mitigating actions that would need to take place in event of any potential impacts for those species in the landscape. And of course, the restoration actions that you would be working towards would need to be aligned with the STAR report as well, of course. Looking at the data on suitability of biodiversity monitoring system, if it exists, and then the greenhouse gas calculation, so the carbon accounting spreadsheet That is Annex 5. And we are coming now to the final few slides. In the third section, again, so additional data on greenhouse gas emissions and removal where it exists. As I mentioned, stakeholder analysis template and the documentation of any of the stakeholder engagement, which has happened in the preparation of or prior to the concept note development, framing the existing concept note around the processes which many of you will have been involved in at the landscape level in the areas and in the project site in and around it over the last time that you've been there. Grant, budget, and project financing templates, we discussed that already. And then, of course, feasibility studies, assessments, permits on environmental and social safeguards, as mentioned previously. And in terms of the timeline, this is the high-level timeline. It takes us through to the notification of shortlisted project proponents. So basically, we've had the launch last Wednesday, the 11th. Today is the first information session, and then the grants portal will be opened to receive submissions by the end of December. It's the 31st of December. And then there'll be another follow-up information session on the 16th of January. And that will principally be to go into any further, once you've all had a chance to work your way through the concept note template and the annexes, you will for sure have additional questions that we would be more than happy to respond to, if not via the the Innovation Facility frequent asked questions section on the website. We can also do so during the information session and then post the answers to the questions that come up on the website fact section as well. And then the deadline for submissions, of course, is on the 13th of February, 2025. It's 5 p.m. Central European time. And then project proponents that are shortlisted will be notified and invited to prepare a full proposal document, which is very much based on the concept note that you'll be completing if you decide to submit to the concept note, just with additional information. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this short presentation, all this information can be found in the guidelines for applicants. And I do urge you, if you have not yet done so, to go onto the Innovation Facility website, www.innovationfacility.org, and you can download using all of these documents here are where it is in bold text. You can just hover the mouse over and directly download them. That, in a nutshell, is where we are with Innovation Facility, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, James, thanks. There were a lot of questions already.
Great. Let's start at the top.
Yeah. I tried to sort them a little bit so we don't jump between topics too much.
Great. Thanks.
There were some general questions. So the first one was from Stalin Shaba, who wasn't able to download the template. I do think the link should be working. My recommendation would just be to try again, but maybe we can talk with him again on just separate email, perhaps.
Yeah, if they're unable to download from the website, then we can exchange via email with them, follow up after today's information webinar.
Yeah. Then Claudio asked how many projects we believe will be funded.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you maybe joined late, Claudio. So there are 3 project categories: forests, wetlands, and blue carbon ecosystems. And the anticipation is that we fund 2 projects for each of those categories, so a total of 6 in this stage. As I mentioned, there's a large appetite for us to leverage additional opportunities for creating more resources to then use this pool of proposals to then fast track early movers to get the funding in place for this carbon, biodiversity, and livelihood benefits that we're seeking through the Innovation Facility.
Yeah, so it was quite an early question, but might still be good to have it answered.
It's an important one.
Yeah. Salma had another question on Bolivia. So she mentioned that this year, the Bolivian government approved supreme Decree 5,000 something last year, which regulates the climate financing that the country receives and which includes the issuance of so-called carbon credits. So if I understood correctly, there's a limit to how much financing they can get?
Was that a question or was that a statement, Nadia? Sorry, I might have missed the first part of that.
I do believe it was a question, but might be also something to talk about on a specific just email conversation again, because it sounds quite specific to the Bolivian government. So perhaps, Salma, you can send us another email and then we will get back to that one. All right, then the next one. Yeah, Giselle just mentioned that she's working in the NGO and they're doing some conservation activities but need some more experience. I don't think that's necessarily an issue, right? Or is it?
That depends on what experience they are requiring. No? I mean, there's I think just once everyone's had a chance to look at the guidelines for applicants and you see the templates that do need to be completed, that should give you a pretty good indication of if you are able at this stage to apply or not. I think because of the time frame and we're really looking to make sure we get these projects online by July, late July next year, 2025. That gives effectively a 24-month window we're really looking for. So we really need to have those capacities kind of in place in order to deliver this first phase, right? It's basically phase one of the innovation facility. So looking to deliver some strong results in phase one to leverage additional resources and capacities and then scale that.
Yeah. All right, then Boris had a question about the innovation component. So he asks how important is the innovation component of the project interventions with regards to the chance of being selected for funding, and what do you classify as an innovative intervention?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I might invite Charlotte Streck to answer that. So for everyone, so Charlotte Streck has from Climate Focus, and her team have been working with IUCN and with KfW over the last month in developing the tender documents. And this was a number of deep discussions on what is innovativeness and how prescriptive do we want to be. Charlotte, are you still connected? No, you're only available for the first.
Yes. The nature of innovativeness is to a certain degree that you can't fully define it, because if you all know it, then it is not innovative. So the tender documents are offering a number of venues on how the project can make the case to be innovative, very specifically by using technologies, for example, to monitor biodiversity or carbon, but also it could also be innovative finance solution or governance structures. In that sense, it is it's up to the applicants to make the case for innovativeness.
Thank you, Charlotte.
All right. Then the next question from Puya, I hope I said the name correct, was what level of existing baseline data is required at the proposal stage versus what can be developed during the project implementation? So what do they have to have now and what can come in the upcoming time?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of biodiversity, what we're looking for is to generate the star score, right? So looking at the IBAT star, that can be generated either by each of the proponents. On the carbon level, Charlotte, I see you're already connected, so thank you. Take it away.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that Simon König is on the call also, and he will be able to answer the questions on carbon. So Simon, maybe you can respond to the question on baseline data for carbon.
Yeah, sure. So I think at the application stage, what's required is your ability to demonstrate what the baseline would actually be for the different projects or project areas that you might be proposing. One of the eligible costs under this facility would be to actually generate the data. For example, if you need to do inventories that could be covered. So you don't need to have, full carbon stock inventories in order to apply. That's something that could be covered by the grant.
Thanks, Timon.
Cool. All right. I think the next set of questions were all on eligibility. So these are all the questions that came in during your presentations. There are now new ones coming in, but we will go through those later. So there, the first one on eligibility was about UN agencies. I think we already had an email about that. So Angay asked to kindly confirm whether UN agencies are eligible as applicants to help countries access this funding. Does it include other entities?
Yeah, I mean, so again, Sange, thank you for your question here as well. You did send one by email. In and of themselves, there's no restriction against any UN agency applying, but so long as the eligibility criteria of the proponents are met, and that is that the proponent needs to be able to deliver the activities on the ground themselves. So either, I think if you look at the costing framework, when you start putting the budget together, you'll probably understand whether you as UNDP are able to develop that budget within those categories and within the budget lines and the 60% minimum of restoration activities. That should give you a good indication of whether you're able to or not. But in and of itself, there's no restriction per se that you can or cannot as a UN agency. Yeah.
Yeah, he also sent
I
a
would say have a
follow-up
look at
question.
documentation. Yeah.
Yeah, he also asked if UN agencies and CSOs can form a consortium to submit the concept note.
Yeah, I mean, a UN agency on its own would not be able to deliver the activities that we would need to see for the innovation facility. So I would say most certainly there would need to be a full breadth of civil society organizations, NGOs that are able to, and partners on the ground that are able to deliver the actions. No, so yeah, there needs to be a strong governance of different stakeholders, I think, in place on the ground to get the work done. No?
Suresh asks, would community organizations be considered as collaborating institutions?
Would who, sorry?
Community organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So local communities are an eligible actor themselves. There needs to be, of course. I mean, I would anticipate there being a consortium, no, where the local community organization themselves are a key stakeholder, and they're the ones that are able to inform the decisions that are taken within the project, in and around the project site as well, no. And of course, the benefit sharing mechanism needs to be developed together with those very local communities. So absolutely, there'd be a critical stakeholder and partner. Now, the framing of whether they are the project lead and the proponent, that depends on each organization. It depends on many factors, but that's completely up to everyone's discretion of whether they're able to, develop the concept note and fulfill all the content that we need for the concept and the annexes. No?
Yeah. And I think for everyone who's uncertain if they're an eligible project proponent, we do have this section in the guidelines where this is described. So I hope that helps as well. Okay, then the next question came from Ime. The question was, is IFM included as a technology? I don't know what
improved forest management.
Maybe you do. Yeah, I guess.
Well, I mean, as a technology, I mean, improved forest management practices. So yeah, you can include certain technologies that are helping you take better informed, actionable decisions around the management of your forest or your ecosystem, for sure. That would be, a part of potentially the innovativeness as well. How those technologies and solutions are helping you make better decisions faster and more cost-effective in a more cost-effective manner. No, I think if that answers the question.
I hope. They also asked about ALM.
ALM.
You know what that is?
No, I do not.
All right. Well, I hope the first part already answered that question. All right, then there was a question by. Oh, do you have an
Go on,
answer?
Simon.
Yeah, I could jump in. So maybe on the
Yeah,
IFM,
cool.
if I understand the question correctly. So
Yeah.
there are some project interventions that could be classified as IFM. So for example, if you have land that technically is classified as forest because you have some remnant trees, but the intervention really is to restore those areas to more productive forest. And I can't speak for IUC and you for the facility, but that's something that intuitively could be considered if you're talking about the bulk of IFM projects that are currently on the market with avoided logging, I think is probably less conducive to the kind of projects that are to be promoted here. Hope that answers the questions. And on agricultural land management, as someone's just clarified. I think also it would probably depend a little bit to the degree that that trees are involved. So if it's a pure soil carbon project on improving agricultural practices, potentially less suitable. But yeah, I'm not sure, James, if you want to further comment on. So agroforestry specifically is included.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if it's more sort of reduced till projects like that, maybe you can comment on those, James.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably not, just because of the nature. You're looking at different strategies that you can use, living fences and things. But that's not really this. We're looking for significant carbon removals, and obviously there is a huge potential with ALM probably. But at this stage, you would have to be developed in such a way that it fulfills, adheres to the project categories that are included in the innovation facility.
All right. So next question. Next question came from Catherine. I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question, but they asked if mangrove projects can be planted with REDD, so red, or WRC. And then there are some codes, so VM0048 and VM0033, until the VM0033 is consolidated to include conservation activities. I'm not sure if it's...
So, I mean, first of all, I don't know, Catherine, so no red projects. No. So I don't know if that replies to that question directly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the WRC, if you could maybe just pop that in the chat. Lots of acronyms today, no?
Wetland restoration and conservation.
Okay. So I mean, no red. So
okay,
basically,
so also not if it's kind of a blend. All right.
No, because it's focused only on removals.
Yeah. All right. And then there were a whole bunch of questions on eligible countries. So one person asked if we could actually share a list of eligible countries, and then there were some specific questions, for example, on Myanmar, because Myanmar is an ODA eligible country, but on a sanctions list. So there, I think we already decided it's out, because every country that is sanctioned by the list we provide in the guidelines cannot be funded.
That's correct. Yeah, and that's stipulated. Yeah. Sorry, Jack.
Yeah. Then there was also a question on Tunisia. I'm not sure if that is on any sanctions list. And Sierra Leone as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would use the access link to verify that in the guidelines, and then you'll be able to inform also yourselves. Because for us to answer that question, it's just as well for you as prospective proponents to access the link yourself and just to verify that. And if your country is not on an international sanctions list, then that means, and isn't an ODA list, then it means that you are eligible. Otherwise, unfortunately, not on this occasion.
Yeah. All right. Then Cleo asked about the wetland category, because I think the presentation was very much focused on peatlands, and they asked if projects related to non-peatlands, for example, Ramsar sites, could be eligible.
Yeah, I mean, Yes, so long as the project is focused on carbon removals, yeah, I would certainly think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I mean, peatlands, yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, so
Go
just
ahead,
inland wetlands.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Then the next question came from Kylie, and they asked if initial consultation, feasibility, and pilot project has been completed, but the project is yet to complete certification. Would the certification costs and launch be eligible for funding?
Yeah, that is the essence of the funding, right? So it's to make sure the projects get over the line and reach that validation and registration in that 2-year window. So they're absolutely eligible costs. Yes, Kylie.
Yeah, great. Then another question from Sengai was, can the project intervention or landscape focus on protected areas and wildlife sanctuary?
Can they focus on protected areas and wildlife sanctuaries? If the activities that are being proposed are not if they're aligned with the management plan of that protected area, then I would say yes. Of course, if it's the status as a national formally recognized protected area, there's going to be different levels of involvement of different national to national level stakeholders and government authorities and partners now. So I would say in principle, it's possible so long as the actions that are being proposed are aligned with the management plan of the protected or conserved area. And yeah, all the permissions and licenses that you need to do that would be in place. There's an expectation, of course, that protected areas are generally just better conserved, but that's not always the case, as we can clearly see. So if we can generate more resilient ecosystem integrity in and around protected areas, then that's going to harbour the greatest potentially benefit for biodiversity in those KBAs as well now.
All right, good. Then the next block of questions were on financing. So again, the first one I have here was again from Sangai. So they asked mobilization of private finance. Is it external or domestic?
Oh, it can be absolutely both. There's no specification on where that funding is mobilized from. Absolutely, it can be one, the other, or both.
All right. Then Claudia asked, is there a ceiling for an indirect rate?
A feeling, as in, is there an estimation?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess
a ceiling. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I think, Claudia, it's a good question. I mean, the indirect cost that we would usually use for sort of a conservation focused project would be 6.5% now. But that, again, it's something that you would have to sit down and assess based on the funding framework of this project, because this is not a traditional conservation project budget. So you'll have to sit down and have a look at what the numbers look like based on the proposed activities and using the categories of budget that we've stipulated. There are, I mean, the minimum 60% for the restoration activities, that is set in stone. That's non-negotiable. Everything else has to be measured. It has to be verifiable. And effectively, if you submit a proposal with, massive indirect costs, when you've got all the other categories where you can include, costed price cost there, then I think, I would just use intuition and good planning around that indirect that you would think you would need. No, that's not already captured in the other categories.
Yeah. All right, then Tamir also had a question on the indirect cost, but I think that should be covered by the previous question. And they also asked, is there a co-funding expectation? I think there wasn't a presentation, but maybe we can just repeat it.
Yeah, so 25% of the total grant budget that's been requested. So there's an additional 25% in match funding. I did see a question pop up from someone in the chat, whether in-kind contribution also counts. That is not, I mean, it's great if the in-kind contribution as well, but there needs to be a 25% match funding. As I say, that essentially is it's a commitment from each of the partners to demonstrate commitment to achieving the results and sustainability of the actions that are being developed in these first two grant funding window, 2-year funding window, and then achieving the registration, validation registration before the end of June 2027. So that's 25%. I just saw another question pop up.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, then Carolina asked, match funding should be in cash?
In cash, yes. I mean, if it's not in kind, then it is in cash, isn't it?
All right. Then Felix asked, what happens in case you cannot prove the 25% contribution at the end of the project?
What happens if you cannot prove it?
Yeah, so if the 2 years kind of gone by and they cannot prove that they have the 25% additional funding.
I may invite John Karuri if you are still connected. John, are you still there? Because there are a number of grant mechanisms within IUCN that John manages. So yes. I mean, I would just, yes, go ahead, please, John. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so the 25% co-financing is a contractual obligation. So if you don't achieve that, then you have not met the contract requirements.
And what would happen then, John, I think was the question from whoever asked that. Would there be funding withheld, the final payment, for example?
What will happen is that along the implementation of the project, we'll track the matching funds realized, and we'll discuss these cases as they become clear that somebody is struggling. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, John. I hope that clarifies the question as well. It's an important one.
Yeah. Yeah. There was another just follow-up questions I just saw on the question of the match finding to be in cash. So it can be in kind, right? It doesn't only have to be in cash. It can also be in kind partly.
Well, so the 25% needs to be in cash. What I'm saying is in kind. In kind is welcome, of course. If there can be in kind contributions, fantastic. But that would be in addition to the 25%, not as part of the 25%.
All right. Okay, then the next question was from Suresh. What would be the max allocatable budget for Apex?
The max available budget for Apex?
Mm-hmm. For Apex.
I missed that, Nadia, sorry.
So what would be the max allocable, I cannot pronounce the word, but what is the max budget for, for CAPEX? I'm not sure what CAPEX refers to, maybe you do.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. I don't
know.
I guess it's capital expenditure, infrastructure, if you like. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we don't have a max on that, right? It's the same with the other budget part. So 60% has to go to restoration activities and the rest is kind of up to them.
Yeah, so as long as there is a 60% minimum for restoration activities, then each project proponent would develop that budget template based on their own specific project needs. And so long as they're adhering to that 60% for restoration activities, that's the minimum, and everything else would have to be submitted. And then there would indeed be, an exchange with ourselves and with John as senior grants manager to make sure that they're all aligned. Yeah.
All right, then the next question was from Jonas. I think we got some messages from him too, so that's cool. What are different proofs of match funding? So he also asked if in-kind match funding would be allowed, so we already discussed that now. So he asked about what kind of proof we want for the match funding.
So the proof that's included is basically John, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's at the end of the funding period. So whilst there is this following, let's say, I'll call it monitoring, but basically whenever there's the financial report submitted, that then is, let's say, it's taking stock of where each of the projects are in terms of implementation of the funding dispersed and indeed of the match funding. And then that's something that John will follow up with each of them on. There's basically a proof to be submitted at the end of the grant funding period. John, could you maybe expand a little bit on what that is exactly, how that looks like in each of the different kind of grant mechanisms that we have?
Yeah, so if you like the same proof that you will for the costs that are funded by these grants. So if, for example, you have a staff member who's funded 75% by the project and 75 is match funding, you would show the same proof, that is contract, timesheet, and payslip for the same person. And it applies for all other things. If you have capex of 1 million spending and your match funding, then you would show the costs incurred in the 25% match funding. So the proof is the same for all cost elements.
Great, thanks, John.
Right, so that was the list of questions I gathered throughout your presentation. So I think now we can continue with the questions that came in after. The first one there is from Ian. Who asked if you could please elaborate a little bit more on how one can plan funding over the full lifetime of the project, so say for 100 years. So I assume that's on the project financing template.
Maybe Simon, can you answer this one? Just relating specifically to the project lifetime.
Could you repeat the exact question?
It was, please, can you elaborate a little more on how one can plan funding over the full timeline of the project, say for 100 years?
Yeah, first of all, it's up to the project, of course, to define the lifetime. Of course, under different carbon standards, different desired lifetimes apply. And I would challenge the proponent to make a plan. I mean, if you have a project and you say that the lifetime is 100 years, then I would expect you to be able to plan for those 100 years, at least roughly, right? So the idea is really to come up with a plan and for a financing plan for how the project is going to be operated for the period that you're proposing. I'm not sure that's very helpful, but
Yeah.
if you can't plan for it, then I would, could be a.
Yeah.
I mean whilst we've got you, Simon, though. Yeah. So we've got a few questions related to that. So they're saying, like, can it be shorter than 40 years? Because some, especially Indigenous peoples organizations would like to see shorter lifetime projects. Now, I think the minimum that we established is 40 years because that was based on VCS, but maybe you could expand on that, Simon. This is for Drea.
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the standard. I think here, given that we're looking at restoration projects and the desire really is to lock in removals for a longer period of time. I would suggest that you look sort of at a minimum 40-year period, and the question then becomes how you incentivize, I guess in this case primarily through carbon revenues, the maintenance of those stocks for that period of time, but also going beyond carbon, right? I think we know that carbon is a crucial component, but here again, I think the question is how can the project demonstrate that it really is in the interest of local communities and other stakeholders to ensure the maintenance of those projects in the longer term, right? So if we're talking about agroforestry, for example, laying out the benefits that would accrue to landowners beyond carbon and in the longer term. Hope that helps a little bit.
Great, thanks, Simon. Yeah. Drea, I hope that answers your question as well.
All right, and there was also another question, sort of, by Drea, who mentioned that they can't find the call on the IUCN grants portal page yet.
Oh yeah, so Drea, the reason for that is, as I explained, so that will go live on the portal page at the end of December. What you have at the moment is access to the Innovation Facility website, which has all the documents that you will need to prepare your concept note. But you won't be able to upload it to the portal, unfortunately, till the end of December. But yeah, you won't find it there. You're right. Very astute of you, Drea. Thanks for flagging that.
Okay, cool. Then the next question was again on the co-financing and when it has to be presented. So parallel to getting grant funds or in the second year of the project. I think that has already been answered as well, that it has to be presented by the very end.
Well, so it's during the reporting itself, which is where there'll be kind of eyes on the match funding, and then at the end is the formal communication that the match funding was fulfilled.
All right. Then the next question from Emmanuel was, how many thematic areas can we pick and which are lead?
How many thematic areas for each project?
Yeah, I assume perhaps there's kind of a combination of two. I'm not sure. But I would assume they have to pick one,
certainly
right?
Could be. I think, there needs to be one priority category because there needs to be a focus. I mean, it's only 2 years. So I think any activities which are being proposed, delivery is everything, right? So you need to make sure that you have really well-designed projects that you're able to implement and deliver on in the maximum 24-month window. It could be less, depends on when we get the contract signed. But yeah, up to 30th of June 2027. I would definitely caution against trying to develop a proposal that covers more than one category, just because we want to see really strong delivery of a focus within one of the 3 categories themselves. But hey, it's a free choice. If you want to go ahead and develop a really compelling proposal that does cover more than one, then obviously that is acceptable. But I would probably caution against it.
All right. Then the next question came from Claudio, who asked, is a regional or multi-country approach preferred?
Absolutely not, Claudio. This is not it's not an icky call. There's no specificity. It's really about hitting the landscape in or near a KBA in the ODA eligible country, which is not subject to sanctions, that you're able to deliver carbon biodiversity livelihood benefits on in that 2-year window, at least to establish the conditions for your project that would deliver on those carbon biodiversity livelihood benefits over the lifetime of the project. So the focus is really on mobilizing finance in that window of 2 years and making sure you get the validation and certification, validation and registration. I did see in a couple of comments, Nadia, that people asking about, do they have to get the certification of the credits in 2 years? Absolutely not. This is the validation and the registration, which is the first step of the certification process. So yes, that's the objective of making sure that each of the projects fulfills that requirement, getting the additional funding and the validation and registration.
All right, then another question from Shreya was, can we use a novel protocol like the PACT framework Cambridge proposal to replace?
Simon, I would.
That one?
Yeah, I mean, I would say no, but Simon, maybe you would like to comment on that. I mean, we've discussed a lot already. In the guidelines, you'll see today that it makes specific reference to VCS and gold standard. It does say that other methodologies will be considered on a case-by-case basis. So I think, today, if you have a really strong case and you're able to justify that in a compelling manner in the proposal, then go ahead. But just, you'll see the language is quite clear that the expectation would be a global VCS gold standard, preferably, but case-by-case basis we'll assess. But Simon, maybe something from your side. Thanks.
Yeah, I think as long as you're able to demonstrate how the standard meets some of the integrity and quality criteria that are emerging under the core carbon principles and so forth, I would encourage you to apply, even if it's not a VCS or a gold standard methodology.
Great, thanks, Simon.
All right, so I'm trying to skip, given the time, some questions that are repeating. Okay, so there was another question by Sarah. Are there any limitations to consortia size?
No, absolutely not. I would say the pragmatic limitation would be the budget available and the time frame. So if you're looking at, leveraging an already existing consortium of partners that have a strong, healthy relationship and dynamic where they're able to deliver strong results, then that's all good and would be probably preferred, because then you're going to hit the ground running. But yeah, I think there's no specific limit at all. You can add as many consortium partners as you want on the portal when you get to it. That's up to each of the project components.
All right, then there was another question on whether they are allowed to combine marine biomass and bush innovation to contribute to carbon credits, sorry. The combination of marine biomass and bush innovation.
I mean, that would be transversing the project categories. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say without knowing more about the proposal. No, I would caution against that because okay, sorry, okay. Potentially yes. But if are you using different methodologies though for each of those, Lucia? I don't know how that would work if you're using. Okay. Okay. So Sebastian came from Sebastian, did it, Nadia? Or did it come from Lucia?
Sorry?
Who did the question come from?
It came from Uyava.
Okay.
Urban.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, what you're looking for is, I think with the funding identified for a specific project site that would be based in or near a KBA, it's difficult to think about a ridge to reef kind of approach because of that's not the nature of this funding. No, I think we're looking at getting one, project validated and registered to an internationally recognized carbon standard within a maximum 24-month window with up to 1.5 million euros. So I think a ridge to reef approach is not really what this innovation facility is looking at the moment. It's really about trying to bridge that and increase and mobilize private sector finance and address that funding gap, but also deliver measurable improvements for biodiversity and livelihoods as well. No?
Yeah. All right, then there was a question if we can share the presentation. I think we will, including also the recording.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
All right, then Emmanuel had another question. I need clarification on land use. Are you saying that the area where we plan to implement our project must have remained forested and not be deforested for the past 10 years?
No, that there has not been any deforestation or degradation over the last 10 years.
I think degradation is okay, right?
Well, yeah, sorry. So if there's degradation, what you're looking for is that there's been no deforestation on the project site over the last 10-year period. Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
We're looking to restore degraded and deforested landscapes, but deforested more than 10 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Then there was a question, does it also encourage agroforestry? definitely yes, part of the forest category.
Which one, sorry?
Does it also encourage agroforestry?
Absolutely, yes. That is
Yeah.
one of the subcategories of the forest project category. Absolutely.
Yeah. Can the fund feasibility? Next question. So if you fund feasibility studies, I assume.
Yes, absolutely. So Simon already answered that. So the baseline would be covered definitely as an eligible cost in terms of developing the data that's necessary to get the project validated and registered. Yeah. I just saw a question, Nadia, on land labor as well. Land labor, so that would go into that would be covered by the restoration budget category, Stalin. So land labor, yes, you're saying it's even more than 25%. So how do we show that at the proposal development level? That's effectively included in the budget category of restoration activities, where you're capturing not the proponents' staff time per se, but you're capturing the local labor costs of restoration activities at the land or seascape level. That would be included in that 60% minimum that you need for the restoration activities.
Yeah. All right. The next question would be, what if the organization is already in partnership with the government, but is not as a co-financer? So do we still need to get 25% from other co-finance or in-kind?
Yes, because that's an eligibility criteria for each of the proponents. So unless is the question then saying that they have within the framework of their existing collaboration with the government, they already have funding secured for implementing restoration actions or for delivering on carbon project setup? It's very context specific.
Yeah,
but I would say yes, each project needs to demonstrate that matchmake, that 25% match funding.
Yeah.
But if you can do that from the government, which is bringing in the additional funding, that would also be okay, as long as you're able to demonstrate that, right?
All right. The next question is about the carbon credits. So what is the scope of carbon credits? Does the proponent take benefit out of carbon credits generated out of this?
Simon, would you like to answer that one, or Lydia? Lydia and Simon are part of Charlotte Streck's team at Climate Focus.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but yeah, the carbon credits and voluntary carbon market is one of the probably the main income source here. So yes, the expectation is that that carbon credits will be the main income stream, and as such, of course, pay for project implementation moving forward. I mean, we would expect, of course, a proper benefit sharing mechanism to be in place to make sure that that benefits ultimately reach communities and other stakeholders. But I think the answer is yes.
All right, then I'm not sure if we already got to the question from Drea, just also on carbon certificates. They wrote some certifiers have a 30-year contract length. Would you accept that, or only 40 years? Indigenous peoples want outcomes-based crediting with shorter contract length.
Yeah, we answered that already, Nadia.
All right.
Andrea said yay for innovation, which I agree. That's the trick is in the name, no?
Yeah.
She has a hand raised.
Yeah. Okay, then there's a question. Are there any specifications on which methodology to be used under the GS or VCS standard for agroforestry projects?
No, there's no list of eligible methodologies. I think there's a field in the application to detail the methodology, and we would expect that to be currently not decommissioned. I can't remember what the exact term is. So it should be an active methodology under any of those standards. And let's say if the methodology is currently under revision, then we would expect the revised version to be used and hopefully available by the time that the project goes through validation.
Yeah. Okay, I think the next question might have already been answered as well. It's if carbon credits are to be developed, can they only choose mature international or national standards? Have we already answered that one? I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, next question was then, what about grassroots organizations? Are they eligible to apply?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, they would fall under the category of eligible proponents. So yeah, I mean, just look at the guidelines, have a look at how you could deliver the outcomes of the innovation facility at the project level, and most certainly.
Mm. All right, then Lang asked, if selected, how do I apply for funding? I assume that's just, they don't have to apply anymore.
If you're selected, if you're shortlisted from the concept note stage, then you pass to the full project proposal stage. And then how would you apply for that? You'd be invited to develop the full proposal based very much on the content you submitted in the concept note, but just providing additional information, and then signing a contract with IUCN, hopefully by July 2025.
All right, and I think the next question we haven't covered yet is from Irina, asking, will the innovation facility have several calls or only this one? And is there any tool or event plans to find project partners?
Yes, great question. So in terms of the funding, so this at the moment is, we want to finance more, of course, but this is what we have financing for right now. So this is just the start. And in terms of, what was the second part of the question, Nadia? Sorry.
Is there any tool or event plan to find project partners?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's very early on we discussed this, Irena, about having a potential matchmaking. That's not really where we are at the moment. We need to sort of consolidate at least these initial projects, understand how we can have a better, more sustainable, lasting impact at the landscape level, and social, of course, networks within those landscapes and biodiversity as well. But I think, matchmaking, I think there are a number of existing platforms and other partners that do provide sort of different matchmaking functions. So it's probably worth looking into some of those as well. But in this case, not yet, but it's something that I would be interested in developing as we progress and are able to deliver strong results in this initial phase of the innovation facility.
All right. The next person asks, are banks and financial institutions eligible to apply?
Are they eligible to apply in and of themselves? I don't think they're not ineligible. So I think if they were to form part of a consortium and they fulfilled the criteria for selection, then yes. Yeah.
All right, then Caro apparently got a bit confused about the country eligibility, so maybe we can just clarify again. They wrote, so if the country is listed on the ODA list, does it mean we cannot pursue any project activities in there, or does it mean the applicant, the leading organization, cannot be based in that country?
So long as the activities of the project, of the grant-funded project, are taking place in an ODA listed country, and that country is not on an international sanctions list, then that's fine. It doesn't really matter where you're based as an organization leading that project. Of course, there needs to be a strong link with the local level activities and implementation to ensure that actually it's not a top-down approach, right? This is about trying to foster, networks of expertise, local knowledge, science, innovation for maximum carbon biodiversity and livelihood impacts. Benefits.
All right, then
Nadia, I'm just cautious because we're now on the half an hour.
Yeah.
So I think could we, if it's okay, could we then maybe respond to the questions and put that in our frequently asked? How many more do we have to go through, Nadia? From the call? Just
Yeah, I'm
seeing
on the
people dropping
questions
off
now from 15 minutes ago. I'm not
Okay.
exactly sure how many questions there are still that are new.
And I think there are also some questions in the Q&A part that haven't been responded to. Not in the chat, but Q&A. There's a bunch of questions
What is the
there.
Q&A?
You have their chat and then you have Q&A. So the Q&A part
Oh.
also has a lot of questions that haven't been addressed.
I would propose, because I'm seeing people dropping off now, the idea is that we have the answers that are available to everybody. So if people start dropping off, then they're not going to be, they won't be benefiting from hearing the answers to the rest of the questions.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that we then put the remaining questions that you've all shared in the Q&A and in the chat box of today's webinar, and we upload them to the Innovation Facility website under the frequent asked questions section, and then we continue using that function to, okay, thanks, Drea, to continue responding to the questions that do come in. But just to say thank you to everyone for joining. Really appreciate your dedication today. I hope it's been helpful for you. Please do check out the documents in the guidelines for applicants, and we look forward to hearing from you in due course as well. I'm wishing you all the very best in the preparation of any application that you would like to submit. I'm wishing you all a happy end of 2024 and a great start to 2025 as well. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.